Your Honor, if I may, I have another objection to the charge. And that is really the reason I am here, is I'm a member of the Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm here to protect your freedom and everybody else's. This is Parks versus the City of Columbus, which states the law that applies all over the country. This particular case involved a street fair open to the public, where a gentleman was wearing a sandwich sign with religious message, passing out tracts and preaching on a public street. Although it was closed and there was a private vendors had reserved the area, and he was told to stop and then arrested when he preached. And basically the court says, the federal court says that he has a right, that the public streets are traditional public forums, and he has a right to be there, especially during a street fair that's open to the public. Is just like any other member of the public can be there, he can be there, and he can preach, and he can hand out tracts. Permitted or not permitted. He doesn't have to have a permit. Mr. Stockstill chose to get a permit in order to try to cooperate, and he thought that he was within his limit. But even if he didn't have a permit, the court has said that this particular preacher, Mr. Douglas, attends public events to proclaim and communicate his religious belief by wearing signs, singing, preaching, and distributing leaflets and talking to people. Here in Columbus, barricades were placed at several intersections in the Civic Center Drive and its perpendicular streets to prevent automobiles from traveling down the street. And during the art festival, the Civic Center is open to pedestrians and vendors who set up along the side of the road. It requires sponsors to get permits. Mr. Douglas didn't have a permit. He was approached by an officer, told to leave. He didn't leave. The court found that he had a First Amendment right to be present and do exactly what he was doing. That a sign bearing religious inscriptions, he indicated that he was distributing religious literature to anyone who would accept it and preaching to anybody who would listen. It cites a long line of cases that date back to the beginning of our republic and beyond. It says that public streets generally constitute traditional public forums. The public streets and sidewalks have been used for public assembly and debate as hallmarks of a traditional public forum. Streets and parks are quintessential public forums. Public places historically associated with free exercise of expressive activities such as streets and sidewalks and parks are considered without more to be public forums. And streets and parks have immemorially been held in trust for the use of the public, and time out of mind have been used for the purpose of assembly, communicating thoughts between citizens, and discussing public questions. And there is no public discussion of more vital importance than religion. The court goes on to say that the Arts Council argued in that case that they tried to limit it just to arts. The court says no, that was just the purpose of the organization. A public street is for public expression of public issues such as religion. The city's constitutional protection doesn't disappear just because a private organization blocks off a portion of a city street. It's still a city street. Open, it is open to the public, it's open to him. In order to, there's a strict test in order to restrict somebody's right of free speech and their right to religion, and in almost no case can a government meet that strict test. In other words, even without a permit, he had a right to be exactly where he was, doing exactly what he was doing on a public street. That is the law of the United States of America, has been the law of the United States of America since we became a republic, and in fact was the law of the colonies before there was a republic. And so it is of interest that and importance that he had a permit, but he cannot disobey unlawful order. And it is unlawful for a police officer to tell him not to exercise his First Amendment right. Then it becomes down to the point of whom do I obey? If the Holy Spirit is speaking to him and tells him that he must preach Jesus, perhaps to people who will never be in a church. If that's what he's called to do and what he's moved to do, that's what he must do. And if he's told that he must, by the state, that he must obey man and not do it, he's got to choose. Do I obey man or do I obey God? That's not a position that any Christian wants to be in. But more and more in today's world, Christians are going to be forced into that position. And because things are changing fast. And we're going to be in that position more and more often. And we got to decide. Daniel had to decide, do I pray? The king has ordered that I not pray. Do I pray to God or not? Daniel had to pray. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to decide, do I worship the idol? Do I bow down and worship the idol, or do I stand? They had to stand. They weren't people who were looking to disobey the government, but they had no choice. They had to obey God. Well, it just happens that Jeremy Stockstill is feels a call by the Holy Spirit to try to speak to people who may never hear the gospel otherwise. Who knows whether he might say exactly the thing that needed to be said to somebody at exactly the right moment. We don't know, but God knows. And his word does not come back void. So he might have planted a seed that bears fruit years later. But because our founders believed that was necessary, they set aside the public streets and sidewalks as a place where that could occur, because those are public forums. And so even for that reason, we would ask that Your Honor would consider dismissing